Good morning, friends and enemies. In today's video, we're running through our top 36 running back rankings for the 2025 fantasy football season post NFL draft. So we're back into the groove of things. Earlier this week, we did the wide receiver version of that. Will be linked down below. Next week, we will be doing the same thing for quarterbacks and tight ends. So make sure you subscribe if you give a shit about winning your fantasy football league. All right. Let's take it from the very top. We're tiered up, we're tiered down, and this should come as no surprise that there's one man and one man only. That back pain was real, but also symbolic of the way that Saquon Barkley carried the Philadelphia Eagles last year. I mean, for me, he's in a tier by himself. He's the 101. Maybe you want to take Jahmyr Chase. I don't care. I'm taking Saquon Barkley if I got the one. They gave him a raise this offseason. There's just no reason to think that he won't duplicate what he did last year this year. All right, Kenneth Gainwell's gone. Potential receiving bump, whatever. None of it matters. Saquon Barkley, 101, no matter what. Let's just move to tier number 2. And tier number 2 are guys that I would feel phenomenal about having as my RB1. They're just not Saquon Barkley, and it is two dudes here, and we are talking about Bijan Robinson. He had a breakout year last year, 15 touchdowns, nearly 1,900 yards. He is about to enter his prime. If Michael Penix is good, Bijan Robinson is going to be great. He already was that last year, but he's only going to get better. And Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, you have an elite offense. You have an elite skill player. Extremely high floor. I think people look at Gibbs as like a high ceiling player because of his speed and his explosiveness, but I would say the appeal for me for Gibbs is actually his floor, not his ceiling. Monty's still going to be involved, and he's going to be involved on the goal line, but that really hasn't mattered at all. They both score a ton of touchdowns, and Gibbs is capable of breaking off a single fantasy point total on any given play, all right? So great offensive line, great offense. I know Ben Johnson's going to be gone, but I still think the sum of the players is what makes up an actual offense. Gibbs is elite. So yeah, skill, offense, line, everything. He's in tier 2. Tier number 3 is another tier made up of two guys. It's dudes that I still feel great about having as my running back 1, but less so than tier 2. Barely, all right? It's Derrick Henry and it's Ashton Jeanty. Derrick Henry, I mean, the age concerns were just overblown and absolutely outed throughout all of last year going into Baltimore new scene. If there's anything we've learned from last year, it is that I'm not overly concerned about the age of running backs as long as they're in a really good situation. You know, it's kind of been the debate this offseason of like the Giants move on from Saquon Barkley. And I think what's become very, very apparent is like a very good running back is not going to make a bad team good or even much better. But a very good running back will make a very good team excellent, all right? And we saw that with a lot of the veteran running backs last year moving into really, really good situations, whether it was Saquon, whether it was Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, and those guys didn't turn the teams around, but they did improve and were kind of a revelation for the running games in those respective offenses. Anyways, Derrick Henry, 16 touchdowns last year, same setup, same ceiling, probably the odds-on favorite to lead the league in rushing touchdowns this year. Then you have Ashton Jeanty, top 10 pick, no limit on the amount of touches that he can get or the fantasy upside that he could have year 1. You're the 6th overall pick. You are going to average 20-plus touches per game, and that is just hard to come by in fantasy these days, all right? So that is tier 3. And again, basically what I said in the wide receiver video, as I'm doing rankings this summer, my rankings are all going to be set up by tiers, and I am not ranking Jeanty below Henry just because I talked about him in this video. Obviously, the way numbers work, you have to have one above the other, but they're in the same tier for me based on the tier label, what I'm saying about these tiers, all right? So like tier number 4 is guys that I think you can, without a doubt, succeed if they're the RB1 on your team, all right? And this is a bigger tier. So I have Jonathan Taylor, Devon Achane, Chase Brown, Josh Jacobs, Bucky Irving, C-Mac, Alvin Kamara, and Kyron Williams. To me, they're in the same tier, all right? So I'm not going to sit here and say that I, without a doubt, prefer Josh Jacobs to Alvin Kamara. These are all guys where if you showed me your team and they are your RB1, I feel like you can, without a doubt, succeed. And I'm not looking to draft one of these guys completely over the other guys. You guys can make your own tiers, but none of these guys are necessarily ranked over the other ones for me. They're all in the same, sphere of when I'm building a team, when I'm building a strategy for my draft. This is the way I'm looking at this group of guys here. So we'll start off with JT. You look at the last 5 weeks of last year, guy was averaging 29 touches per game, and the offense clearly wants to run through him. Once JT was healthy down the stretch last year, he was averaging over 29 touches per game, 150 total yards, and 1.4 touchdowns per game over their last 5 games. Obviously, dealt with a lot of health issues last couple of years, but if you remember back in college and the first couple of years in the NFL, I mean, he was a dude who never got hurt. He was a literal fucking Iron Man, so if he can get a healthy season out of JT, he's going to go bonkers. De'Von Achane, I mean, dual threat. We saw him as a rookie, got it done through the ground game. We saw him as a sophomore, got it done through the air. Mostert is gone. The offensive line slightly improved, but still probably bad. Achane is just a monster regardless of how you look at it. Next up, we got Chase Brown. Absolute breakout last year. Cincinnati added like depth, but almost nothing serious to that backfield. So yeah, they got Zach Moss, they got Samaje Perine. They also took Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech in the 6th round, who I actually think is a pretty interesting prospect, but like 6th round pick, I'm not overly concerned about it. But this is clearly Chase Brown's backfield, and the way that this offense was set up last year and the porous defense, it looks like they're just running back the exact same thing, which is phenomenal news for Chase Brown. So he is in this tier for sure. If you owned him last year, you know one thing that I think you should really try to remember as you're going into this year and drafting is in the next 5 or 6 months, it's before we draft, or I guess like 3 months now, we get very caught up in trying to break down numbers and predict like the percentage shares of stuff. Try to remember how you felt about these dudes last year when they were on your team. And if the situation, like if you owned Chase Brown last year, week in and week out, you were feeling like you had a high-end RB1. You weren't overthinking like, oh, this guy might lose touches here. Oh, this guy might do this and that and the other thing. Like, it just happened. Like, those things happened, and I don't think unless the situation changes drastically, unless Cincy went out and drafted Caleb Johnson in round 3, unless X, Y, or Z happened, there's not a lot of reason or logic to think that things are going to change drastically in that backfield, and you won't feel the same way about this dude this year than you did last year. So don't overthink it. If anything, overfeel it, all right? That's the fucking motto of the summer. Don't overthink it, overfeel it. Remember how you felt about this player last year while the fantasy season was actually going on, and unless there's been drastic changes, likely going to run back something very, very similar. So Chase Brown is like the poster child for what I just said right there. High-end RB1. I'd feel good about having him as my RB1 on my team. Same thing with Josh Jacobs, like great back in a good offense. Just keep this simple. Rushing touchdown upside is tremendous here. Bucky Irving, absolute stud as a rookie. With Bucky, I mean, you just look at how the season went last year. He just continued to get more and 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 more involved as the season went on, and Rachaad White took a back seat, and I think we're just going to see that be the case coming right into 2025. They have all 5 of their starting offensive linemen returning. They drafted Emeka Egbuka. I mean, this offense is not going to skip a beat. It's going to be high-powered, and they get to play against Carolina, Atlanta, and New Orleans twice a year each. So the schedule is going to be beautiful. C-Mac, I mean, this is one where I don't have a hot take here. It's just going to be all eyes on that Achilles all summer. If he can go completely unscathed and everything is perfect throughout the summer, he'll probably move up a little bit. If not, he might move down. I don't know. If the injuries start, I'm going to be off of C-Mac completely, though. Alvin Kamara. We'll have to see what happens with New Orleans. They have Derek Carr retiring now. I don't know if Kamara's here for the long term. And by the long term, I mean, the rest of this year for New Orleans Saints. It might make sense to just completely move to the youth version of this squad right now and try to move Kamara now, or try to figure out a way where he's not on the team this offseason. But if he is, it's just going to be more of the fucking same story. Still PPR monster in a bad offense that's just going to have to give him 1,000 touches again. So extremely high floor player if he is on the team this year. Next up, we got Kyren Williams. Now, he was kind of on the back end of this tier for me. I was going back and forth with him. His efficiency obviously dipped last year, and I think a lot of people are going to point to that. I will say that their offensive line dealt with so many injuries last year. Their overall offense did too. Puka was out for a while. Cooper Kupp missed a lot of time. So there wasn't a lot of focus outside of Kyren Williams, especially with a bad offensive line. So it wasn't very easy to fucking run for him. I would say like Sean McVay just trusts the shit out of him. And I do think Devontae Adams coming in helps with the spacing of this offense. Blake Corum was a complete non-threat to him last year. They did draft Jarquez Hunter in the 4th round, who I actually really like, and I think he fits this offense pretty well. But again, I just think when Sean McVay trusts the guy, he just really, really, really trusts the guy. And we've seen that with Kyron Williams. He came out and talked last year like, we're going to get Blake Corum more involved. And then the next week it'd be like Kyron 25 touches, Blake Corum 4 snaps, So until we really see anything otherwise, I just don't understand why we wouldn't think Kyron Williams is just going to do what he's done the last 2 years. Moving into tier number 5. These are guys that I love as my running back 2, but I'm extremely skeptical to have them as my running back 1 or thinking that they can carry the team as an RB1. And listen, if you're drafting and you're basing your strategy on, again, how these tiers are shaking up, if you have elite playmakers elsewhere, like you got 2 wide receiver 1s, a high-end tight end, and then this guy's your RB1, you'll probably be fine. But like him a lot more as my RB2 if I'm building a standard team. Skeptical as someone that can carry my team as an RB1. So we got James Cook here, and maybe I'm overthinking this one. He had 18 touchdowns last year after not scoring touchdowns the previous couple of years. Those numbers are obviously going to dip. I think his floor is really cemented as a top 15 back at worst, just given the attachment to this Bills offense. But I do think they re-signed Ty Johnson to an extension. I think they want to get Ray Davis a little bit more involved on the ground. I wouldn't be surprised to see a little bit more of a committee, though. I think James Cook is someone with a really high floor. So, I'm not necessarily uncomfortable with him being my RB1, but I'm not going to be surprised if he ends up giving you RB2 numbers. Like if his touchdown numbers dip from 18 to 8 or 9, which is still a really good season for an undersized back, I think that probably puts him closer to RB15 than it does to RB4 or 5. Then we got Breece Hall. I mean, Breece had a weird 2024. We saw glimpses of Breece Hall, and then we saw glimpses of him looking like fucking Jahmyr White. Could get a rejuvenated offense, new head coach, new quarterback, and Justin Fields might open up lanes. But I'm going to be honest, I'm a little skeptical. Hall did not have a single game last year with more than 18 carries. And then you have Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis coming off of relatively good rookie years that I think they're going to get more involved in this offense as well. They stole some goal line carries, which were valuable from Breece. Something was just clearly off. He didn't have the same elusiveness or explosiveness in New York last year. So I'm like, there's just no way you could draft him as your RB1 and be comfortable based on what we saw last year. Next up, we got Omarion Hampton, the 1st-round pick for the Los Angeles Chargers. All right, 1st-round running backs historically, over the last 10 years, have averaged 18 touches per game as a rookie. It might take a month or two for him to completely take over this backfield, but I think when things end up mattering for fantasy football, that is when Hampton will take over on top of Najee Harris. Harris will be involved, and he'll probably be involved throughout the entire season because they want to keep the running backs fresh. They want to have a very, very high volume running game, but Dobbins is out. Gus Edwards is out. Hassan Haskins is going to get probably 10 snaps this entire year. It's going to be Najee. It's going to be Hampton, and then towards the end of the fantasy season, when it matters, it'll be mainly Hampton. Joe Mixon's in this tier. If you had asked me this, week 6, week 7, week 8 of last year, I'd say he's a top 5 fantasy running back, but he slowed down tremendously over the second half of 2024. They lose Laramie Tunsil. They lose Kenyon Green. They need help on the offensive line badly. But there's still something in me that just can't shake off how good Joe Mixon looked early on. They did draft Woody Marks out of USC, who is going to have a clear pass-catching role in this offense, which I think does hurt Joe Mixon a little bit. So I think Mixon, a lot of what his fantasy success will be is tied to whether or not you believe Houston can bounce back. And without Bobby Slowick, I do have a little bit of faith that can happen. So again, I think he's a solid RB2, but if he's your RB1 going into next year, I think you're going to have a team that I would be skeptical about. I think that's the same with James Conner, where I'm not going to be surprised if he has a really good workload. He did get the extension last year. The Cardinals seem really confident they could just ride Conner until the wheels fall off. People like the prospect of Trey Benson, but realistically, Trey Benson showed very, very little as a rookie. Nothing to suggest that he's going to start stealing James Conner's workload here. But Conner, as always, is kind of projected to miss a couple games. And I like the chances of Arizona being a pretty good offense this year. So James Conner's in this tier. Aaron Jones, another vet who's in this tier. They re-signed him to a $10 million a year contract. They bolstered the offensive line pretty heavily. 1st-round pick offensive line. They brought in Will Fries and Ryan Kelly from the Indianapolis Colts. As long as J.J. McCarthy isn't a complete bust, this offense should really thrive again. And Jones will be the 1A. Not even the 1A. He will be the 1 to Jordan Mason's 2B. All right. So really like Aaron Jones. Touchdown upside is always a little bit questionable with Jones. But I think it's a good offense, good scheme, good offensive line, good weapons around him to keep everything spaced out. I like Aaron Jones this year. And then the last player in this tier is Chuba Hubbard. They gave him the contract extension last year because he was playing out of his mind. Jonathan Brooks is going to miss, I think, all of 2025 with the re-tear of his ACL, unfortunately. RIP to the GOAT. Carolina's offensive line is tremendous. Took a huge step up last year. Bryce Young obviously took a huge step up last year as well. Chuba, to me, is a high floor value running back. I will say I'm a little bit nervous for what type of opportunity share he's going to hold up with. Like last year, he ended up, with 80% of the opportunities in that backfield, but he was also really efficient. Like he had a great year, and he did it despite being on a team that was not winning a lot of games. They did add Rico Dowdle, and Rico Dowdle had a very good year for Dallas, so he's a very good complementary piece. And then they drafted Trevor Etienne in round 4, which isn't nothing as it relates to draft capital. So there will be a lot more competition for touches here. And even if Chuba Hubbard goes from 22 touches a game down to 16, that is the difference between being an RB1 and being an RB2, which is why I don't necessarily want to go into the year with Chuba as my RB1 on a team that's projected to have 6.5 wins this year. And that is where Carolina is at. That being said, he did all this being on a team last year that was in the same or if not a worse situation. So I don't want to hold that too heavily against him, but I will say a little bit more skeptical about Chuba this year, but I think he's a high floor player. Moving into tier number 6. This is a tier with, I think it's just exploding with upside. These are strong options, high upside, but I think present risk if your lineup has them as your RB2. They will have chunks of the season where they present a lot of risk for your lineup. All right, we'll start off with Kenneth Walker. We are entering year 4 of the Kenneth Walker experience, and it's getting to the point where we can't shake the what if narrative for Kenneth Walker. People who like Kenneth Walker love Kenneth Walker, and you just can't convince them that he's not the best running back in the NFL. It's just one of those weird things that happens in fantasy football. They're enamored by his talent, but the dude simply just can't stay healthy. And I'm a little bit worried about the offense overall. I do like the fact that they brought in the first round guard, used heavy draft capital on him, but their offensive line is still going to be bad. Geno Smith is not here. They put Sam Darnold in his place. I don't feel like that's really an upgrade here. They lose DK Metcalf. They lose Tyler Lockett. They bring in Cooper Kupp, which I don't love the swap there either. So I'm a little bit skeptical about this offense. They do have another dude behind him, second round draft capital, Zach Charbonnet, who had 8 rushing touchdowns last year. He scored a lot last year, man. Charbonnet's there, and he's a part of this offense to the point where, I don't think we see Walker really operate as a 3-down bell cow, at least not during this year, because they've tried to do it over and over again, and it continues to not work out. So Kenneth Walker, to me, is an RB2 that I think presents as much risk as he does upside, despite the way fantasy players will make you feel about him. We've got David Montgomery in this tier. He's another guy that just feels like he gets written off every single season, and I bet it's even going to be more elevated this year with the breakout of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery coming off of an injury. But prior to getting injured, David Montgomery was scoring weekly, if not multiple times per game. Again, he's just a perfect fit for this offense and what Dan Campbell wants to have there. So I just don't ever see a world where David Montgomery is phased out of this offense. They want that. Even when Gibbs was broken out, we'd still have games where David Montgomery would take the entire first quarter to himself. I just think he's still going to be a very big part of a very, very high floor offense. DeAndre Swift, kind of the opposite here. Somehow completely avoided Chicago adding a running back through free agency and anything outside of a 7th round running back in the NFL draft. I think they definitely would have went with either Travion or Quinshon Judkins had he fallen to them in that early 2nd round, but they didn't get him, and they traded back after they took Luther Burden. I think there's still a chance that Nick Chubb signs with the Bears, so I would not put that past it, and that would make it a little bit murkier here. But here's the thing, as much as we might not think DeAndre Swift is that good of a pure running back, I don't know that it would matter in this situation if it's just him and Roshan Johnson and Kyle Monagai, because they bring in Ben Johnson. And Ben Johnson actually worked with DeAndre Swift. They played together and coached together in Detroit. And he was very, very involved in the passing game in the overlap of years that they had in Detroit. And the biggest thing here is he's not going to be running behind the worst offensive line in the NFL anymore. They've got heavy draft capital in the tackles. They bring in Jonah Jackson, Drew Dahlman, and Joe Thuney to shore up the interior of the offensive line. So if it's just Swift there, there's just no talking yourself out of the situation for him. So we got Swift, and we've got a bunch of rookies here. I got Travion Henderson here, 36th overall pick. You add him to an exciting offense. Year 2 of Drake May, improved offensive line. Again, high upside guy. Do I trust him out of the gate to be my RB2? I think that might be a little bit rich, but I think he works himself into that role. We've got Caleb Johnson here. I think he fits right into that Najee Harris role. He honestly could be a 15-plus touch guy in game one immediately. So I think you could argue that he could go into the next tier. I just don't think he's kind of earned that yet. Then we have Quinshon Judkins, early round 2 draft capital, tons of opportunity in that Cleveland backfield. However, I will say the drafting, I'd feel a lot better about him had they not drafted Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee 2 rounds later, 4th round. But I do think this is going to be a really cool duo in Cleveland for a long time. I really like both of these backs here, but that kind of dampens his 3-down ability as a rookie. And last one in here, I actually threw RJ Harvey in here. Round 2 draft capital is huge. I still worry, like, he's a 205-pound back. He's 24 years old in a backfield where the coach has always used a committee. I think they'll be really creative with him. I think he'll catch a ton of passes. I don't know what I project his workload to be on the ground, but I do think he'll be a really solid PPR player. We've seen a lot of players that fit this, older running back, 2nd-round draft capital, undersized, like bust out in the NFL. And by bust out, I mean bust and flame out in the NFL. So, like, I'm still skeptical and concerned about his profile, but the situation in draft capital kind of say otherwise. And the last dude in this tier is Tony Pollard. I feel like we kind of got to respect Tony Pollard a little bit more, and I think you could make the argument that he could be in the tier above this tier right now. He just rushed for 1,000 yards for the 3rd straight season, despite being on the team with the number 1 overall pick. And speaking of that, you now add an actual competent quarterback in Cam Ward to be the dude who is pushing this offense, which is obviously a good thing for Tony Pollard. I mean, Tajay Spears was a fucking nothing burger last year until the very end of the season, which is why there's going to be like Tony Pollard schmear campaigns going on, because it's like, look what Tajay did the last 4 games of the season. I still think this backfield very clearly runs through Tony Pollard. There is systemic risk, just drafting a running back on a team that just had the number 1 overall pick, a very low win total, just being on Tennessee right now while they're like in the midst of a rebuild. However, they did upgrade their offensive line. They bring in Kevin Zeitler. They bring in Dan Moore Jr. So that plus the back-to-back years of drafting offensive line in the 1st round, I do think we could see a nice little uptick in the efficiency of this offense. So Tony Pollard's been doing it year in and year out, despite being kind of left for dead. So I would feel cool about him as my RB2. Obviously, this tier, again, is like they present risk to your lineup as your RB2, but I think you could do worse. And worse would be the players in this next tier. This tier, tier 7, and the last tier in this video, this is a group of dudes that if you are using them as anything more than an RB3 or a choice flex play, your team is probably in trouble. And we'll start with Bijan Robinson Jr. I think you could also make the case that he belongs in the tier above this, but he has missed multiple games in the NFL in all 3 seasons. He has yet to rush for more than 800 yards. He's a talented back, generally speaking. And I think if he could suit up for the full year, he'll be a really nice value pick in a very, very good offense. But that's a big if. And I don't know. He just hasn't really put it all together yet. I don't think he was like a super talented back coming out of Alabama. I think he was a nice like 3-down back, and he's kind of parlayed that into what he is at the NFL level. But there's just a lot of ways that this goes wrong for Bijan Robinson, and we've kind of seen that happen a few times already in his career. The rest of this tier is guys a lot like Bijan Robinson. You have Tank Bigsby, you got Ramondre, you got Isaiah Pacheco, Rashad White, Jalen Warren, Tyrone Tracy Jr., Najee Harris, and Javonte Williams. All dudes that are very clearly in committee backs. You got Tank Bigsby, who earned an early down role and really, really earned it as a sophomore last year. Absolute lack of involvement in the receiving game, though. And we also saw Liam Cohen use a running back by committee in Tampa Bay last year, which is probably going to happen. Though there have been some rumblings of like Travis Etienne possibly getting moved because they drafted Bashaw Tutin in the 4th round. So if that's the case and like Etienne gets moved and Tutin is the 1B to Tank Bigsby, I'll like Bigsby a lot more. Though going into the year right now, you're not going to want to depend on Tank Bigsby as your RB2. Same thing with Ramondre Stevenson, given the draft capital of Travion Henderson. Isaiah Pacheco is a tough one to really wrap your head around because he looked awful last year coming back from the injury. And I'd like to think that coming into this year, he's going to be more healed and more ready for game action. But I don't know that there's promise for him to return to form. Like, they re-signed Kareem Hunt. I don't know. That feels weird to me. Like, I don't feel like Kareem Hunt should be a guy that you're re-signing at this point. They drafted Brashard Smith, who I think is very clearly going to play the pass-catching role here, which limits Pacheco's upside. I just think when you're a 7th rounder like Pacheco, you don't have a lot of, like, room on that leash, man. And last year was not a good year for him. And I think there's a chance that his role gets dispersed between Kareem Hunt and Brashard Smith, and if they bring in another running back, I really don't know here. So I don't have a lot of confidence that Pacheco returns to form, although he should start out the year as their starter, and it likely will be his job to lose. So again, not a dude that I'm fading, but like I think if they're more than your RB3 or your flex, like you are probably in trouble. Same thing with Rachaad White. We just saw him get completely phased out last year, unless this is a full PPR league. And even that, I don't feel great about him, but that's the only time you're drafting Rachaad White this year. Jaylen Warren, I put in here. I think you can make the case that he should be a little bit higher, but I do think Caleb Johnson coming to Pittsburgh. They did add Kenneth Gainwell as well, so he could be a little bit of a pass catcher. I just think Warren's going to give you exactly what he's given you the last couple of years, and that is RB3 to RB4 production, where we keep yearning for him to be on the field more, but he's going to play a pass catching role. He'll get some early down stuff, but Pittsburgh just really hasn't shown any indication that they want to use him as a workhorse, and Mike Tomlin has been speaking nonstop about Caleb Johnson being the guy who comes in and plays a heavy volume role. Tyrone Tracy Jr., breakout season last year, over 1,100 yards from scrimmage, despite a slow start and fumbling issues. I will say, though, Cam Scatabo coming in does make this tricky. I think this kind of speaks to them not wanting to use Tyrone Tracy as a pure workhorse. Like Tracy a lot as a player, former wide receiver, so I think there can be some upside here. I'm just not sure how this backfield is going to play out, and this is not going to be a very good offensive team anyways. So I think there presents risk with Tyrone Tracy. Same thing with Najee. I mean, the obvious case here is Omar and Hampton coming in. And then I got Javonte Williams here. I don't know who's going to win the backfield in Dallas. I don't know if anyone's going to win the backfield in Dallas. They have Javonte. They got Miles Sanders. Like, it's disgusting out here. But they did let Rico Dowdle walk in favor of Javonte Williams. He looked absolutely cooked last year. Yeah, I'm not drafting him with any sort of excitement, but like you can make the case for why you should just be drafting a Dallas running back, and he seems to be atop the depth chart right now. They drafted Jaden Blue, who is an extremely explosive, phenomenal pass-catching back out of Texas. So I think that role is already gone. No one else is touching third down, 2 and 4 minute drill, long down and distance passing roles. Like clearly not Javonte or Miles Sanders' role. So you're talking about an early down, maybe the goal line back in an offense that could be good. So like I get it, but Javonte just seems like he is the most average running back in the NFL at this point. So I believe that was 37 of the top running backs this year. The way I'm looking at the tiers, the way I'm breaking them down. Again, they all just kind of fit in a tier where to me, they're interchangeable. One guy in that tier is the same value as the other guy in that tier. So I'm not ranking them in order that way because I don't feel strongly about one guy above another guy. If I did, I would just put them in the tier above. All right. So top 37 running back rankings for 2025 fantasy football. Sound off in the comments. Let me know how dumb I am. Let me know where Breece Hall needs to be a top 8 back. Bucky Irving not high enough. This guy too low. All that bullshit. Down below, go watch the wide receiver version of this. And again, next week, quarterbacks and tight ends coming up. So subscribe to the channel if you're new. I love you.